Well, cloud collaboration and data privacy, these are very popular buzzwords. It's certainly floating around. We hear them a lot: data governance, data compliance, data residency, and that's just a few of them. But what does it all mean when it comes to keeping your data safe? Well, here joining me is Sanjay, Webex product management leader. And Sanjay, I'm looking forward to learning more from you here. Help us cut through the clutter to understand perhaps what is it about user and organization data, keeping it safe, keeping it out of the hands of bad actors. What is most important to understand here? How do we begin to wrap our heads around this?
Of course, Rob. Thank you very much for having me in. And data privacy is a fundamental need for any organization across the globe, right? But you're absolutely right. There is so much ambiguity around what do I do with this program? I mean, is it certifications I go after? Is it compliance? Is it data regionalization? Like, what do I go after? So we always like to suggest our customers, hey, it's you have to define your own privacy program and understand the goals for your own privacy program. Once you are able to understand the goals for your privacy program, that's when you're able to ask the right question and pick up the right technology and the collaboration solution for your needs.
Excellent. Well, so following that thread then, when it comes to goals, where could you kind of lay it out for us in terms of where should these goals be set? Can you make that more approachable?
Absolutely, Rob. So, for most organizations, kind of goes into three different dimensions. Right? It's my organization's boundaries and policies.
Okay.
It's the regulatory needs, and then the third, the parameter for selection would be the trusting your provider. Organization needs like, hey, what goes in and out of my organization, and regulatory needs would imply, hey, as the nature of my business or the country I'm operating in, what applies to me to be compliant, and then how do I trust my provider? How do I find a provider which is worthy of safeguarding my data?
I'd like to explore those just a little bit further, starting with, curious why this is first on your list. Perhaps there's a reason if these are in order. Data governance, what's important to understand there?
Yeah, it's look. I mean, it's your data. It's organization's data, and you know it best. You know what is sensitive, and it's very natural to expect that you would have a complete control over your data. But do you, right? I talk to industry security leaders every day, and they tell me their number one concern is not at this point of time something which is happening from outside, but how their data is being shared from within the organization, how people are sending information across. Are people accidentally or intentionally giving out information which is sensitive to the organization? So it is very important for you to be able to reflect your organizational rules and boundaries into your collaboration platform. You have to be able to say, who should be able to collaborate with who else, within the organization and outside the organization. What can they exchange? What is the classification of the information that they can exchange? And then eventually, if the violation occurs, what to do? And it is extremely critical that you are able to reflect your organizational policies into your collaboration platform.
Well, I like what you're saying there in terms of just the internal focus that you're hearing from customers, because I think we often forget about that insider threat. There's just too much assumed trust internally quite often. But number two on your list, we talk about external requirements perhaps, or, the compliance factors and stuff that are weighing on us. That was important as well, yes?
Yeah, absolutely. And given the nature of your business, there may be regulatory compliance just from the industry standards that you're operating in, health, financial, and stuff like that. But depending on the nature, the region you are operating in, there could be government and regional regulatory requirements that you would require to comply. I mean, Cisco did a benchmark study for privacy, and 92% of our, the audience came back and said, hey, data regionalization is significant for our operations at this point in time. So when you go out and selection for your provider or a collaboration solution, it has to account for those kind of needs where the data has to be regionalized in your environment, for example.
Yeah, that's been a huge one, hasn't it? Because at least I'm guilty of not paying attention to where those things were historically, but we don't have those options anymore to kind of only check it out if we feel like we want to. The governments are going to make us do this. It's important that we comply, and there's good reasons for this, and we need to make sure those tools exist. But talk about trust for a moment, and I'm curious about Because I think we all agree trust is good, but how do you demonstrate trust? Where does that fall? How do you begin to do that back and forth with a provider?
Yeah, and a great, I love discussing this topic in detail, but trust is not about one thing. It's a combination of things, and what those things are will continue to evolve as the dynamics change across the world or the technologies change across the world. But I like to break them into three principal tenets, right? One is your product itself, which is you gotta have the security and the privacy and everything baked in from the conceptualization, from the design, from the development, ground up into the delivery. It's not something that you can bolt onto the finished product. So it has to be baked into the development life cycle, all phases for the product, right? So that's things like end-to-end encryption and the compliance policies and ability to reflect your organization's policy in the system. They have to be thought through from the ground up. So that's one aspect. The second aspect is just the principles of it. Things like transparency and the respect for your data rights, and provider has to be able to demonstratively deliver their advocacy for these principles. And not only it will showcase the data handling in today's world as the new technologies come in and evolve. I mean, we are seeing, for example, AI takes a very prominent role in the collaboration experiences now, right? And as these experiences come in, as the new technologies come in, the handling of your data will be driven by these principles that are baked into the DNA of the organization. So it's very important to pay attention to principles like transparency and respect for your data rights as you work with the provider. And third is the continuous commitment, right? It's not about the relationship today. It's about your data goes in there. It's not about something you're setting up for today. It's about the continuous relationship and your provider's continuous commitment. So you have to be able to watch through, how provider has been able to measure up or completely changing landscape and dynamics around privacy and security over the period of time, and how much promise is going to come in the future.
Yeah, that's interesting because what I hear a lot of what you're saying there too is just it's a different mindset, and it requires. That's why it's not a point in time, not a project that is going to be taken on and then finished, and moving on to something else. It's really got to be more cultural. It sounds like you're saying there as well. Before we run out of time, I'm just curious. You've given us a lot to chew on. How would you maybe narrow down and say this is advice I'd like to make sure you remember at the very least?
Yeah, and I would like to come back and say one thing again. There will be a lot of buzzwords thrown at you. There will be a lot of certifications, compliances, data regionalization, all the things that will coming at you. You got to understand what is the goal, what are the goals for your privacy programs. And once you are able to articulate that goal, ability to select a right provider would be easier for you.
Perfect. So yeah, there's some personal decisions from an organizational perspective, as well as an understanding and relationship with your providers, not being afraid to ask the hard questions. Perhaps, maybe it's not so hard for certain organizations, but make sure you know that information. Well, Sanjay, thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me here, Rob.
Absolutely. Say, for Webex customers, you guys can always learn more and receive self-service access to security, data privacy, compliance information, and more at the Cisco Trust portal. If you're not a customer, you can certainly reach out to your Webex representative. I always encourage you to work with your account teams and make sure that this stuff is getting you exactly what you need. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Rob Boyd. Enjoy the rest of your day.